In the upcoming Fast Track session, I will delve into the key annotations used in Spring and Spring Boot frameworks. The primary annotation used to configure an application with Spring and Spring Boot is the Spring Boot application annotation. Application starts up in a servlet container, providing an isolated environment for execution. Default Tomcat server used here. This annotation combines three more annotations which are at configuration, at enable auto configuration, and at component scan. Another important note is controller. Controller is used for web MVC applications. To work with REST services or APIs, use a REST controller with request mapping for communication. This will enable me to clearly indicate an entry point to my application and effectively direct its flow towards the desired destination. A view this request mapping annotation is used for MVC web applications, and there are 4 or more specializations. We have post mapping, get mapping, put mapping, and delete mapping. These 4 here are the main ones used for web applications. Each endpoint uses a specific HTTP verb, such as post, get, put, or delete. Another annotation, this one belongs to Spring, it is at auto-wired. What it does is inject a dependency that is found within the container. Run towards our class. At service is a Java annotation used to indicate that a class will contain business rules or will be a service component in the application. A service within my application. The @repository annotation is used to designate a class specifically for data access purposes. At configuration allows us to use this annotation in classes that define beans. They will be discharged into the Spring container for further processing. At component scan indicates which packages or package the application will scan, to register them within the Spring container for proper dependency injection. And at value is used to inject values that come from our properties file. YAML to bring them into attributes of my class. Example for each annotation will be shown. We are going to develop this within an application using Spring Boot. We're heading to our IntelliJ IDE, and I am planning to create a new project titled Spring Annotations with Java to work on. With Java, Maven, I put my group ID, my artifact ID, I will use Java 17 and packaging of the YAR type. Basically, I just want to understand the structure of this project to be able to explain it effectively. Annotations, I am going to use Spring Web, I am going to add Spring Data JPA, H2 database, and that's it, create. The first annotation is Spring Boot application. This annotation, which is automatically included by my Spring Initializer, is a key part of the Spring Boot application setup. To say that this particular class serves as the foundational root class of my entire application. From here, within this default package, everything you add below this specific package in your project structure. It will be scanned by my Spring container to be able to give height to the classes or inject objects. Subsequently, the next entry is at compose scan. This entry is since by default everything underneath this package will be scanned automatically, presenting my Spring Boot app. But, if we add it, can you specify any default package where you want it to be? Spring scans annotations like at service and at repository during startup. Etc. here is an attribute known as the base package feature, and I can share with you an example to illustrate its function. Explicitly, my default package is going to be this one here, which I believe will suit our needs perfectly. Here, IntelliJ gives us a warning because by default the component scan functionality is already provided by the framework. This warning ensures that redundant or unnecessary configuration is avoided, maintaining the efficiency and clarity of our code. Using the same package in my Spring Boot application is implicit. The speaker suggests skipping a particular item as it is deemed unnecessary. If I were specifying a different package, for example, net.curious, that's it, here. The warning has been eliminated, confirming the correctness. I am specifying a package different from the root package, but if we put the same one too, it will also work obviously. A warning will be placed for the compose scan annotation in the add configuration. The add configuration is commonly used when I want to declare additional bins for specific functionalities or customization purposes. My configuration. I register the class as at configuration settings. And ready. I can create extra storage bins here. For example, my bin. I am registering a new bean in the Spring context. Then I can add the file at bin directory. New bin named my bin is in a different application. I can inject it. How would you inject it? We are going to add a package, controller, new class, my controller, and here I can inject it. And if I want to reuse the same content, I can utilize AutoWire functionality here. By incorporating it in this manner, I am injecting the content. But obviously I must use AutoWire inside a class that is annotated with a spring. In this particular scenario, the following annotations can be applied at service, at repository based on my role. In the data layer, and in this case I am in the control layer, I can use a REST controller. To indicate that this is a REST controller, that the methods it has by default or the ones I add, they're going to work with JSON format for data exchange. They are not going to do web MVC redirects, but rather they are going to handle responses in a RESTful manner. Get JSON content and return JSON or XML or plain text. How do I register a method, for example? String my method. To register the new endpoint, you can use the @request mapping annotation in your code. It helps map the endpoint URL to a specific method. Default, and here I can say that in order to invoke this endpoint, it has to be done with the specific credentials. Then with this URL, this functionality of my method will be invoked. By default, request mapping will work with HTTP get verb, meaning it will return this. content. But if I want to work with a different method, I can specify it in an attribute that request mapping has called method, although good practice tells me that what I need to do is use either a get mapping, add put mapping, add post mapping, etc. There is an annotation for each HTTP verb like get mapping, put mapping, etc. How are they used in RESTful services? Let's incorporate another method. My get mapping, so here. Using the notation is like specifying request mapping for the get method by default, and I just specify the URL here. Use post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping, etc. Ready. Okay. Those are the 4 notations for mapping REST services. If I change here for working with an MVC web app involves handling the controller differences and main annotations. Another notation would be component. Component is the base annotation. All annotations or stereotypes in Sprint inherit from component. Core stereotypes in software development: REST controller, controller, service, repository. Annotations that exist for Sprint: service for business layer, repository for access layer. Entries in data represent values, including a specific entry for value to add significance. That is declared in my properties or in my YAML file depending on which format you are using. This method, I can set my property to a value